Hey, welcome back. Hey, I've got two things to talk about. And we skipped over it a little bit in chapter 1 and chapter 2, but I want to bring it back to you. Yes, it may be in the quiz. Yes, it may be in the exam. So you better know about this. And that is this notion of, is there some way that we can distinguish the best situations for using action control or results control or people control of action control? And there is a way, there is some framework. And this framework is based on vertical axis. What is the knowledge of which specific actions are desirable? If you have very excellent knowledge of the actions, of course you can use action controls. If you have very poor knowledge, poor here, well, it's very unlikely you can use action controls. So action controls depend a lot on the knowledge of the actions that are desirable. So in banking, we can have standard operating procedures for many of those tasks because we know what has to be done and what not has to be done. But in sales, there may not be one way of selling a car. There may not be one way of selling insurance. But there may be some part that may be an SOP after the sales has taken place. But the actual process of selling, convincing someone to buy, may be different. So how you sell to someone in Singapore may be different from how you sell to someone in Malaysia, in China, and USA. So the knowledge of which specific actions are desirable to get that sale in different countries for the same product may be poor. So you may not be able to have the same action control in every country, for example. The other dimension is the ability to measure results on important performance dimensions. If you can have good measurement, guess what? We know that because I showed you that yellow diagram where we had the culture controls, we had the action results controls, and we had action at the bottom. You remember that, don't you? Because, you know, part of the results controls was, the key word was, you know that. It was measurement. Yes, it was measurement. And we know measurement, and that's why we have on here ability to measure results. Yes, you know that. So if you have very high ability to measure, guess what? Yes, you can. You can use results control. And if you go down to here, you have low abilities to measure. No, you can't. You cannot have results control. That's very clear, isn't it? Results control depend on being able to measure the results on important performance dimensions. All right, action control depends on the knowledge of the action. People controls, when you have very low ability to measure or very poor knowledge, then people controls can come into it. A good example here is a research lab. Actually, one of the case examples we might try and cover later this semester is an example of a joint venture, a pharmaceutical company in China, where they actually had a balanced scorecard and they did measure their research lab performance. How did they measure? They used the number of patents or the number of lab tests done. So they broke down the steps and then tried to measure each of those steps. Number of lab tests done, a number of retrials done, a number of patents, a number of newsletters written across the organisation of new testing that was being undertaken. So they tried to measure different aspects of their research lab performance. So you can try and measure it because sometimes people controls can be strengthened with measurement too. They don't depend on measure. But if you can measure it, then you can also contribute to the people control. But at the last minute, if you cannot measure things, very low ability to measure, very low knowledge of what is desired, then people controls is your only action. So then you've got to hire the PhD. You've got to hire the researcher, the pharmacist, the scientists. They know in their mind what they have to do. Don't question them, will you? All right, that's where you're stuck if you're over here. But once you move out of here, you've got more ability to measure. Once you have more knowledge, then you have a full range of controls to play with. Then you can have the full package. Oh, and guess what? Chapter 4, you can have tighter controls because there's less leakage if you can have the full package. You know that, don't you? All right, so get that into your mind and keep that ready for understanding when you can and when you can't have specific results, action, and people controls. One more idea I wanted to take away, and that is this notion of this Sequence. I wanted to cover that and I didn't cover that. I did not cover that in Tuesday lecture. I was so disappointed. We just didn't have enough time. I'm sorry about that. But now I get a chance to take you through it. And that is, what is the sequence of controls? The sequence, we've got culture controls, action controls, result control. The sequence of control. This is where startups are. Startups are, it's the owner's own vision of what the organisation is about. And the most important thing is why the owner. Most important thing in the owner's mind is why they believe customers will buy the product from them, or buy the software, or buy the app, whatever it is. Why will the customer purchase from them? That's the most important thing, and that comes from the owners. That comes from the business model, and you start with culture controls. It's the way the owner shapes the organisation. It's very, very autonomous. Depends on how the owners are. For example, Premium Soft, you know that. We went through the case on Thursday where they have a very laissez-faire approach to how they manage their employees. And that reflects the ownership. It reflects the CEO's approach to how they manage Premium Soft. Most of their employees are programmers, so they have to let them do what they want to do in most cases and make it like a happy environment. We talked more about that in that case. So Premium Soft, great example of culture controls. They also had action controls and probably much less result controls. Now I know what you're thinking, that, oh, what about stock options for a startup? Yeah, look, stock options come later. The startup is about getting market share. The startup is about making very clear the business model, why customers will buy from you. It's that why question, W-H-Y. If you're not getting it, it's W-H-Y. That is the big question. Why do customers buy from you? That has to be impregnated in the culture control. We bring that up into an action control where, as the company gets larger, we start to need more standard operating procedures. Why? Because now I start to delegate things as an owner. I start to employ more people. Suddenly I've got 10 people, then I've got 15 people, then I've got 20 people. I now need to start to have standard operating procedures. So it helps guide them what to do, what not to do. Culture controls is not enough. As we're getting large, we've got action controls. And action controls is always about focusing on processes. Maybe there's inputs, that is people's effort. This is a process, what people do, and the outputs of those process outcomes go into result controls. Now it's possible to break processes into 100 little bits, and that's what the factories in China do. They break the processes. To making the iPhone, they break it up into 90 different bits and have one person work on each little bit. Okay, that's how they do it. And each of them is a little process. And then they have full action control over every person on that production line. That's how they make the iPhone. So when I say process here, it doesn't mean that there's one process in an organisation. There could be 10, 50, 100 processes. But every process has an input, every process has an output. And ultimately, over time, outputs have outcomes. Okay, outcomes can be more subjective. They could talk about the future. Will customers come back? An output, in many ways, can be like an accounting sale. All right, an accounting sale. So we move from action controls where we're trying to focus on processes. Now we move up to results control where we've all grown up now. We've got 50, we've got 100 people, we've got 150 people. We're now making some profit. Guess what? The venture capitalists are coming along. Yes, they want a bit of share in this because they know when it goes IPO, they're going to make lots of money. But I'm the owner. I want to keep as much share as I can. So the big valuation problem for IPOs or for new startups is, how can I get as much as I can from venture capitalists, many millions as I can, without giving up as much ownership, giving up minimal ownership for as many millions. So I give up 10% ownership for 100 million from venture capitalists. That values me at what? $1 billion. Yes, you got it. Okay, but if I have to give up 50%, now my valuation is only 200 million. There's a short lesson on valuation for you guys. All right, but we're going from startup we're going to have culture controls, then we're going to action controls, then we go to full result controls. Yes, we can have stock options. Yes, once IPO is in sight, then we can move to stock options. We can start to incentivize people in the organisation. But that is not the thing that you focus on right at the beginning of the startup. Culture controls and action controls are so critical. They're critical for getting the processes in place, the right processes in place, where you have a sustainable business model that you know why customers are buying from you, and you can continue that after IPO, because you need to keep on making profits after the IPO. Okay, it's not the end of the world in terms of banking when you do the IPO. All right, so we move to result control. Yes, we could have stock options in between this area here. But guess what? We have a gaming behavior issue once we move from action control to the result control. So we need a better information system to make sure that we can control that. So the big issue I want you to keep in mind is that there is a sequence of culture, action, and result control. You cannot really put in result controls first because you need a system in place, a system you can measure things, all right? And you're always going to have some culture control. It's just that, do you really know what that culture is? Or you think you know? Or is it a culture, or is there some kind of culture that you want to build in that organisation? These are the things on the owner's mind. Action, SOPs, standard operating procedures. And then you grow up to be a big daddy, then you can move to your results controls. Okay, pre-IPO, yes, bring in your stock options, yes, bring in all the other incentives and things like that. We've got our results controls. So this is not like a sequence, it's a sequence of adding controls in the organisation. So a good case study for that is the accounting review paper by Sandino. I think it was 2007. I'll put that in IVLE to look at. I think one of you are presenting that in the coming weeks. So maybe not, but I'll actually put in IVLE so you can actually see the sequence of controls that were put in these fashion shops in USA that was part of the statistics and the data analysis for this paper. And what they found was, at the very minimum, they did have basic cost controls, but depending on the strategy, they had, for a differentiation strategy, they had much more results controls focused on sales and market innovation. For the cost management strategy, they had more controls focusing on cost control and saving costs in the organisation. So have a look at that. That's a great example of how the strategy can also in effect the type of controls that are used in the organisation. So let's just stop there. The sequence of control matters. The tightness of control matters. In the end, it's very hard to put everything in at once. So you've got to start somewhere. And what we're saying here is you're always going to start with culture, then action, and then result control. See you in the class. Thank you.